Hi, my name is Rickard, and this week I'm going to be doing something a little different. Rather than doing a tutorial, what I'm going to do is answer 3 questions that I've gotten from subscribers. I'll repeat what the question is and then show you in Photoshop how to do the thing that's being asked. This is kind of a new format, so let me know in the comments if you like this format. Let's get started. All right, let's get started here. The first question is from Martin. He says, one thing I often want to do but haven't found a method, which I like so far, is to add a luminous glow to an image, ideally with a mask option so that it's easy to add just in the right places. To be clear, I don't mean the Orton effect, as I would prefer to keep the detail intact. All right, so let's go to this image here. This is an image Martin sent me. And essentially what we want to do is make these light areas more luminous or glow more, but without blurring them, which is the Orton effect. So I'm going to show you 3 ways to do this, and you can take your pick, which one you prefer. So the first one is we're going to take this layer and we're going to click on it and drag it to the new layer icon down here and let go, and that's going to give us a copy of our layer. And then we're going to go to the blending mode, and the default blending mode is normal, and we're going to change that to linear dodge. And you can see that's created the correct effect here on the edges, and that it's really brightened that up, but it's also done the same thing to the whole image. So now what we're going to do is we're going to double click on the image right here, just over on the right side of the name. So if you double click here, we're going to get the, okay, so you can actually double click on the icon or double click here. Don't double click on the name because that brings you into changing the name. But this gives you the layer styles, and here you can see this blend if option. That's what we're going to use here. So I'm just going to drag this to the side so that we can see our edges here. And this blend if determines how the top layer blends with the layer below it. So this is the underlying layer. So in this case, what we want to do is take this slider and drag it this way so that this top layer only affects this light area of the image below. So all these dark areas are no longer blending with the image below. And we're going to drag that right to about there, so around 120, and there you can see it's no longer affecting the background, it's just affecting these highlight areas. Now the problem is you can see it's clipping, so, and you can see it even more obviously here where you got these, just there's no gradation between where it ends and where it starts. And to fix that, what we're going to do is hold down Option and click on just the right half of this little object here, and that'll split the two. And then when we slide this over, you can see, just look at this spot right here, you can see that it's now gradually blending as opposed to sharply blending. And we can also take this end and move it this way if we'd like, but I think right about there works nicely. And now if we hit OK and turn that on and off, you can see it's just making those luminous, those highlight areas pop. And if that's too much, you can always change the layer blending mode here. Screen is rather mild. Even more mild is to put it on overlay. And that's going to retain more of that color while popping those highlights. And in order to mask certain areas, you can just simply put a mask on there, go on your brush tool, which is B, make sure your foreground color is black, and then just paint out the areas that you don't want. So if we change this back to linear dodge here, you can see we can just, oops, make sure you're on the mask when you paint, and you can see that's going to take out those areas. So if we just wanted it on this guy there, we would paint out the other areas. So that's method number 1. Next method I'm going to show you is taking this layer here, we're going to drag it down here, again make another copy, And in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, go down to Curves. I'm just going to put this over here so we can see these highlight areas. And I'm going to take the bottom of the curve here and just drag it to the right to about 115 there. And I'm just looking at this area here, which is the same area we were looking at before, this area. And just until that's black is kind of what I want. So right about there. So now we just have those highlight areas. I'm going to hit OK, and then we can basically use any of these blending modes here, from lighten, screen, color dodge to linear dodge, and that kind of, those give us a gradient of how much that's adding to the layer. So if we go to linear dodge, you can see again that's really bright, or if we can go to screen, it's still brightening those highlights but not so significantly. And again, we can put a mask on this and go on our brush tool and just paint out the ones that we don't want affected. Now also, what you can do here, I'm just going to delete the layer mask by right mouse clicking. This is also a nice way of doing the Orton effect. So if you have the layer to this point, and actually what you may want to do is do it with a smart object, and I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and delete this. I'm just going to drag it to the trash can. I'm going to do these steps again. But before I go to my image adjustment and make curves, I'm going to right mouse click and say convert to smart object. And after I've done that, I'm going to go to adjustments, curves, and drag this to 113 again, or 114, either way. All right, so there you go. And now I'm going to put this on linear dodge. And then what I'm going to do is go to my filters and go on blur and Gaussian blur. And there you go. That's the Orton effect. And the nice thing about having it as a smart filter is I can double click on the curve here and adjust how much of that brightness. So if I pull this to here and then hit OK, you're going to see I now have that Orton effect affecting much more of the image. All right, so that's a little bit of a sideline without the Gaussian blur and with the curve here set to about there. And you can also, by the way, with the curve, you can just pull the bottom down like this and also punch up the highlights, so like this. And that'll again do the same thing. And of course you can add a mask to that, as I've already mentioned. So that's technique number 2. The last technique, and this one is not doing it with a mask. So this would be if you want to do it straight on the layer itself. And I know you mentioned you want a mask technique. The reality is, as with anything in Photoshop, if you just make a copy of the layer, you can make changes to that layer, put a mask on it, and mask to your original image, and that'll make whatever changes you made only affect those parts that are not masked. Okay, so in this technique, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a curve layer. So let's go to Image, Adjustments, Curves. But in this case, I just want the curve to affect these highlight areas. So how do we do that? Well, first, let's identify where those highlights are. So if I click here, you'll see that little running ball on my curve line. And that's showing you where those highlights are. So you can see they kind of go from about right here to right there. So what I want to do is I want to just affect that part of the curve. Now the problem is if I click here and drag this up, it's applying it across the whole image. So we don't want to do that. Now what I could do is I could maybe put a point here and then click on this and drag it up. But again, it's affecting the whole curve. So alternately, I could go here and try to bring this curve back to straight, and that does a pretty good job. But here's an easier way to do it. First, let's reset our curve. And to do that, hold down Option, and you can see the Cancel button here switches to a Reset button. All right, what we're going to do is click on the pencil here. And what the pencil allows us to do is redraw part of our curve without at all affecting the rest of the curve. So there you can see I just drew this part here because I want that part to go up and be brighter. And if I turn the preview on and off, you can see how that's affecting the image there. And I could even make that more drastic by maybe just going straight up. And there you can see that we're getting a really strong luminance in those highlight areas. So let's hit OK there. And then obviously I could put a mask on that and mask out the ones that I don't want affected. All right, so hopefully that answers your question, Martin. Let's close this. Actually, let's go to question 2 now. Okay, so this is from Jackboy Vasatros. And he asks how to do that just in her face. Okay, so this is in reference to a tutorial on doing color grading with gradient maps. And this is the image that I used in the tutorial, and I'll include a link in the description to that tutorial, which is a great tutorial on using gradient maps for color grading. But the question is, how do we do it just to her face? And the simple answer is using a mask. And I will quickly show you how to do that. Let's click down here to the adjustment layers, and we're going to go to gradient map. And in here, I'm going to select one of my color grading gradient maps. And I have a whole pack of gradient maps specifically designed for color grading and also for nice duotones. And I will include a link to that in the description as well. So let's click on this one because it's really strong and obvious. And what I'm going to do is change the blending mode from normal to soft light. And there you can see with just that gradient map, we're really color grading that image quite a lot. And if we want to just apply it to her face, what we're going to do is fill the whole mask with black. So let's make sure black is our foreground color. Then we can go to Edit, Fill. And here, with our fill dialog, we want the foreground color, blending mode to normal. Let's hit OK. So there you go. That's filled that mask with black. And now we can go on our brush, change our foreground color to white. You can also hit X on the keyboard. That's the shortcut to switch those two. And now we're just going to paint her face. Now, I don't know why you'd want to do this. I guess if she were wearing clothes, it would make more sense to just do it on their face. But that's how you do it. And if you need to have your selection more precise, what I would do first is go on her layer, go on your either magic wand or quick selection tool and click on select subject. And then go to select and mask, and just with that refine edge tool here, I have more tutorials on different selection modes, so I'm not going to go that far into it here, but use these automatic selection tools to get you a nice selection that you can then go into here. We can just delete this layer mask, click on a new one with your selection, and it'll make the mask fit just to her, or you could do it just to her face. Whatever your selection is, apply a new mask, delete the old mask, apply a new mask, and it'll apply that effect to just that area. Okay, so that is your answer there. Okay, question number 3. Can you make a tutorial with a more complex or more complicated background? Same as this where you keep the shadow. Okay, so this is in reference to a tutorial on how to delete a white background while retaining a drop shadow. And I'll link to that original tutorial in the description for this video. Now, I answered this comment with a statement basically saying, depending on how complicated the background is, you'd probably just have to recreate it. And I'm going to kind of show you here. So this is a top view of an object, and we have a drop shadow here, but the problem is this wood background with the slats and so forth, there's no way you're ever going to extract a clean drop shadow of that in order to put this on a different background. So let's take a couple minutes here and just cut this out and then recreate this drop shadow. Now this is a super easy cutout because it's a circular shape. So we're just going to go here to our elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to kind of guesstimate where the center of this is. Click Start Dragging Out. Click on Options so that it's selecting from the center. And then also hold down Shift so that it keeps a nice circle. And I was pretty good up and down, not so accurate left and right. So I'm just going to kind of go to what I think the shape is, let go, and then what I can do is move the selection into place. So I'm just going to move this, and then I can use my arrow keys here as well. Make sure you're on the selection tool. If you click on this and start using your arrow keys, you're going to actually cut and move part of your object or a part of your image. You don't want that. So make sure you're on the selection tool still. Okay, that looks pretty good. We may want to make it a little bit wider there. So what we can do is right mouse click and do transform selection. Make sure you don't do free transform. Make sure you do transform selection. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to transform, like scale, rotate, or skew your selection without affecting your image. So there you go. We just made that a little bit wider. Let's hit the check mark here. And then what I'm going to do is go to Layer, New, Layer via Copy, which is Command J. That's a very common shortcut. You should really learn that if you don't know it already. Alright, so now we have just our cup on its own layer. And if I zoom out here, just get a sense of this drop shadow, you can see that it's pretty blurry right from the get-go, but it gets more blurry as it goes out on this edge. And we have this kind of shadow coming from the cup that also kind of blends into this area. So what we'll do is make a new layer. I'm going to drag this under the cup layer, and I'm just going to go on the regular marquee tool and hold down Option. And what Option does is it temporarily changes your lasso tool to a polygonal lasso, and you'll see what that means. So I'm going to click on polygonal lasso. Means if I move my mouse around, it's just a string there attached to my mouse, and I can make clicks, click, and click, and then let go, and there you go. I've kind of created the shape there of that shadow. Now what I'm going to do is go to, so there's two ways to do this. I could go to Select, Modify, and Feather. This, and then feather radius, let's say to about 55 pixels. And what that's going to do is it's going to feather my selection. Now, I don't like that method because I can't really see, except for the slight roundness of the corners, how much I've actually feathered it. So let's go to History, go back there before we did the feather. I'm going to show you a different way to do it. And let's go down here on the Quick Mask, turn that on, and what that's doing is it's basically taking your selection and making it a black and white image. And if you go to channels, you can see that black and white image here, the Quick Mask. And it's showing it to you kind of as a red overlay. But what I can do with this is I can now go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and actually blur and see how much feathering is being added to it. So, and I can make this bigger, probably want it right about there. So 61 looks pretty good. And then if I go out of the Quick Mask, that's now applied to my selection. Now what I can do is go to my gradient tool, hit D to default to black and white, or click on this little icon here. And then make sure I'm on foreground color, black to transparent, foreground to transparent, and on the linear gradient here, the first one, and then go from the beginning here of my selection to the end of my selection. And that's going to give me part 1 of my drop shadow. Next, I want to recreate this circular drop shadow. And to do that, I'm going to hold down Command and click on this layer. And you'll notice when I hold down Command, I get that little selection box around my hand icon there. And what that means is it's going to use the transparency of that layer to make my selection. So again, hold down Command, Control on a PC, click on the layer. There you can see I've now made a selection. Make a new layer, and I want to fill that selection with black. Now I already showed you here, you can go to Edit and Fill. The shortcut, however, to fill with your foreground color is Option Delete. There you can see on the layer, we now have a black layer. Now because I'm going to be adding some feathering and blurring effects, I don't want the layer to have this selection around it. So I'm going to go to Select, Deselect, or Command D. There you go. All right, so next I want to apply the first level of blurring, which is just what we see here on the original shadow. So we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And let's just click here. So around 30 looks good. And I'm just comparing here. And then I want it more blurred as it goes this way. So first thing I'm going to do is go Command T or Edit Free Transform. Command T, that's one of the most common shortcuts in Photoshop that you really should know. I'm just going to drag this out a little bit. And then I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And the reason I'm using motion blur is because I don't want it to blur more up and down. I just want it to blur more to the side. So let's leave it on 100. We can see how much that's doing there. And then I'm going to go Filter, Motion Blur, and you'll see that Control Command F. What that does is it repeats your last filter. So we'll do Control Command F. We're going to do that a couple times, maybe 3 times. And the reason I do it that way as opposed to trying to do it all in one motion blur is doing it this way kind of gives you a more realistic smear effect. I've noticed just from doing this a long time. Okay, lastly, I'm going to do a Command T on the layer and just bring it down, because you'll notice in the original that the shadow kind of starts a little bit in. So what I just did there is Command T to bring up my free transform. I click, grabbing this, what I'm doing is holding down Option so that it scales from the top and the bottom at the same time. All right, and we'll click on this. And then lastly, I want to delete the shadow that it's added to this end. And I can just do that by clicking here, adding a mask, going on my brush tool, making sure my foreground color is black, and just kind of painting out this side. Okay, so that pretty much finishes it. Now you will notice that this side of the wood is lighter than this side, so if we go down here and we can make this our new background layer, what we'll do is maybe pick a nice turquoisey color to contrast with that yellow. And we'll pick kind of a bright color for one side of our gradient. And then for the other side, we'll pick a slightly darker color. And then on my gradient tool, I want it to go from foreground to background color there. And then we'll just take here and click, drag to there. And you can see this kind of has a hard edge, which we don't want. So what I'll do is I'll go on that layer, add a gradient mask, or sorry, a mask there, go on my gradient tool, put it back on foreground to transparent, and then just hold down, click here kind of at the beginning there, and then just drag and drag. So there you go, it's kind of ending it a little bit earlier there. And then take down the opacity on this. And there you go. Now if we select all these layers, you can see we have a relatively realistic drop shadow, and we can put this onto a new surface. So Hopefully that answers your question. Unfortunately, there isn't really an easy way when you have a complicated background that has variations in luminosity to extract a drop shadow. That it just simply isn't possible, at least not right now. So your best bet is to visually study the drop shadow and then recreate it. And that's certainly a lot better than just adding a drop shadow as a layer effect, because you kind of get a much more realistic drop shadow than just an offset blurred black version of the same layer. All right, so there you have it. Now, if you enjoyed this format, please do let me know. Otherwise, if you enjoy my tutorials, please subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, like this video, leave a comment. Also, if you have your own questions in regards to Photoshop, how to do a certain thing, how to copy a certain effect that you've seen, please let me know in the comments. I will take a look at them and I will try to get you an answer. All right, until next time.